She was bound to his fence post, wrists raw, head bent under the white hammer of a New Mexico sun, and what he did next changed everything, though neither of them could see it yet. That is where this story begins. Not with a gunshot, not with a wedding, not with a sunset over a canyon nobody ever named. It begins with a rope, a fence post, and a woman who had run out of reasons to hope. New Mexico Territory, Cobray Flat. The summer of 1884, Eli Cord was 34 years old and mostly done with people. He ran 60 head of cattle on 300 acres of scrub grass and caliche dust, spoke to his horse more than he spoke to any human being, and liked it that way. He had a history he did not discuss, and a scar below his left ear that told part of it for him. Watch this through to the end. What happened next at that fence post, what passed between these two people over the weeks that followed, is one of the quietest and most extraordinary things the territory ever witnessed. Like this story if it moves you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's go back to the beginning. Eli had ridden out before dawn to check the south pasture wire. He did that most mornings. The cattle had a way of finding the one weak link in 40 yards of fence and pushing through it, and he had learned the hard way that finding the gap early saved half a day of chasing strays across the flats. He was already calculating the work, a new corner post, maybe two, when he came over the low rise and stopped. She was tied to the corner post, not loosely. Whoever had done it knew knots. Her wrists were bound behind her, the rope looped twice around the post, and cinched so the wood bit into her arms each time she shifted. She had stopped shifting. Her head was down, chin nearly resting on her chest. She wore a cotton dress the color of old clay, shredded at the hem, and her feet were bare on the cracked hardpan. The sun was already brutal, barely 2 hours past sunrise, and she was deep in it with no shade within 50 yards. He got down from the horse and walked close enough to see she was breathing. Just. He crouched beside her. He did not touch her. "Hey," he said. "Nothing. Hey." Louder. Her head came up, slow, like lifting a stone. Her eyes opened, dark brown eyes that had been through something recent and terrible and were not finished with it yet. She looked at him for a long moment, reading his face the way a person reads terrain for the fastest way out. She found nothing there she recognized as safety. She found nothing there she recognized as cruelty either. She had not decided yet. Her lips parted. Her voice, when it came, was barely a sound. It was the voice of someone who had used up every other option. "Do whatever you want, cowboy." Eli Cord looked at the rope, looked at her wrists, looked at the corner post that was his fence post on his land. He pulled his jackknife from his coat pocket. He opened it. He cut the rope in 4 strokes. "I'm here to help you," he said. Nothing else. She did not believe him. That was plain. But her legs gave out when she tried to stand, and he caught her arm without thinking, and she was too exhausted to pull away. He did not know yet who she was or how she had come to be tied to his fence. He did not know the name Wade Pruett, or what Pruett had accused her of, or that there were men in Cobray Flat who already considered the matter settled and her fate decided. He did not know any of that. He knew she was Mescalero Apache. He knew she was half dead from sun and thirst. He knew she was on his land in shade. In his experience, in the experience of a man who had once worn a badge and learned exactly what that badge was worth, those were the only facts that mattered right now. Eli Cord was not what Cobray Flat believed him to be. The town called him a hermit. The town was not entirely wrong, but it had the reason backward. He had not retreated from people because he disliked them. He had retreated because he had watched a man hang for a crime he did not commit, and Eli had been standing right there wearing a deputy's star, and he had not been able to stop it. The man's name was Luis Real. He was 22 years old, a sheep herder from Mora County, accused of horse theft by 3 men whose word the judge preferred to a Mexican's denial. Eli had the testimony of 2 witnesses who would have cleared Luis. The witnesses got to town 12 hours too late. Eli resigned his commission that afternoon, rode south and bought the most isolated piece of land he could find with the money he had saved. That was 6 years ago. He had not spoken of Luis Real to anyone in Cobray Flat. He had not spoken of the star. He had not spoken of much. The scar below his left ear was from a different occasion, a knife fight in a saloon in Massila he had walked into wearing that same star, and he thought of it sometimes as the cost of a lesson he should have learned earlier. That authority and justice were not the same thing, and confusing them was expensive. He brought the woman to the ranch house on horseback, her seated in front of him. Barely conscious, he put her in the spare room, which contained a cot, a wash basin, and nothing else. He brought water, cool cloth, and a bowl of pasole he had on the stove. He left the door open and gave her space. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees and waited. Her name was Saya. She told him that herself. 3 hours later, when she appeared in the doorway of the spare room and stood watching him with an expression that had not yet decided whether wariness or exhaustion was winning, she told him in English, which was precise and deliberate, each word chosen with care. She had been raised at the Mescalero Agency School, she said, until she left it at 14, because the teachers hit the children for speaking their own language, and she decided she would rather be hungry in the hills than fed on those terms. She was 26. She had been working as a cook and supply manager for a cattle drive out of Texas, a sprawling, underpaid 2-month operation run by a man named Wade Pruett. She had taken the job because it paid 3 times what she could earn in Tularosa, and because Pruett's foreman, a heavy-set man named Dell, had vouched that Pruett ran a fair outfit. Dell had been wrong about that, or had lied, which amounted to the same thing. 3 days before Eli found her at the fence, Pruett's silver pocket watch had gone missing from his saddlebag. Pruett had accused Saya immediately, the logic being, as far as she could interpret it, that she was the most convenient target. She had not taken the watch. She said this to Eli without emphasis, the way a person states a fact they have already accepted. Nobody will believe. Pruett had not let her finish. He had her wrists bound, threw her off the drive, and rode his outfit into Cobre Flat, where he told anyone who would listen that he had caught a Mescalero thief. Before he and his crew rode on the next morning, 2 of his men had trussed her to Eli's fence post with a coil of rope and left her there. Eli's land was the last property before the open desert started. They had not expected anyone to find her in time for it to matter. Eli listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The watch, you know where it is?" "In Pruett's own saddlebag," she said. "He has 2, the smaller one, inside his right bedroll. His men steal from him, and he never checks. He accused me because it was easy." Eli nodded. He believed her. He was not certain whether he believed her because the story was believable, or because he had learned a long time ago that the first person accused of something was rarely the right one. Either way, it did not change what he was going to do next, which was nothing dramatic. He was going to give her time to rest, food to eat, and then ask her what she wanted to do. That was all. She was not accustomed to being asked what she wanted. That was apparent in the way the question landed, a small flinch, as if she had been expecting a different question entirely. "I have people in Mescalero," she said finally. 3 days east. "I can take you when you're ready," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Why?" He thought about it. "Because you didn't do anything wrong," he said, "and because somebody should." That was not the answer she expected. She went back inside without another word, but she ate the posel. The next morning she was up before he was, which surprised him. He came downstairs to find her in the kitchen, grinding dried corn against a flat stone she had found somewhere, her movements efficient and practiced. She had found the stone in the corner of the porch, where he used it as a doorstop without knowing what it was properly for. She did not ask permission for any of it. She simply worked, and when he came in, she looked at him the way a craftsman looks at a stranger entering their shop, measuring, not hostile. He made coffee. She accepted a cup without comment. They sat on opposite ends of the table, and she looked out the window at the south pasture, where the repaired fence was still visible, the corner post leaning slightly from where he had reset it that first morning. She did not speak for a while. Then she said, "That post was old already." "Yes," he said, "you should replace it, not just reset it. The wood is punky. Pull it and sink a new one." He looked at her. "You know fence posts. I know wood that is punky," she said. "Pull it and you'll see." He pulled it that afternoon. She was right. The core of the post was soft, half-eaten by moisture and beetles, the outer wood holding shape by habit more than strength. He drove to the lumber yard in town for new stock, cut the post himself at the ranch, and had a proper corner set by evening. She watched from 20 feet away, not offering help, not leaving. When he tamped the last shovel of earth in around the base, she said, "Better," and went back inside. He began to understand something about her that week. She expressed trust, not through words, but through presence. If she was nearby, she had decided it was safe to be nearby. If she was not, she had decided otherwise. She had a kind of economy to her that he recognized from years of reading people as a lawman. She did not waste motion or speech on things she did not mean. She was also, he noticed, extraordinarily attentive. She watched the cattle and learned their habits within 2 days. She noticed the sorrel mare was favoring her left front leg before he did. She noticed the water trough on the east side had a slow leak he had been meaning to patch for a month. She did not tell him these things as favors. She told him because they were true, and he seemed like a person who wanted to know true things. She had been raised mescalero, she explained, on the edge of the Sacramento Mountains. Her father had been a skilled hunter, her mother a maker of baskets so fine they were traded as far west as the Gila River. She knew plants. Her mother had taught her which roots broke fever, which bark dried and steeped helped a chest that rattled at night. She had grown up knowing the land around Mescalero the way other people know their own houses. Every path, every water source, every seasonal shift. The agency school had not taken that from her. They had tried, but some knowledge is in the hands and the feet and the nose, not in the mind, and they had not found a way to empty those. He told her, in smaller pieces, spread over several evenings, something of his own history. Not everything. He told her about the star and about Louis Rael. He told her about the knife scar, which had a shorter story behind it, and was easier to say. He was not practiced at this kind of talking. He kept stopping, aware of how thin and inadequate words were for what he was trying to convey. But she listened without pressing. She had a patience that did not feel like indifference. It felt like actual stillness, the way a very calm person can make a room feel larger. One evening he was washing the supper dishes and she came and stood beside him and simply picked up the second cloth and dried what he washed. They stood like that for 20 minutes without speaking. When the dishes were done, she folded the cloth and set it on the hook and went to sit on the porch. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, surprised by how ordinary it had felt. He began to pay attention to things he had not paid attention to in years. The way the light changed on the Sacramento foothills in the late afternoon, the specific silence before rain which she had told him the mescalero called a kind of listening, the desert paying attention. He could not translate it cleanly, she said, but that was the shape of it. She made ash bread one morning without asking his permission to use the fire, the flat bread pressed thin and cooked in the coals of the wood stove, the way the women of her family had made it since before anyone now living could remember. He came in from the early chores to find the kitchen smelling of something warm and unfamiliar, and she was already at the table with 2 pieces torn and a cup of coffee poured for each of them. He sat down, he ate the bread. It was good, denser than he was used to, with a faint mineral quality from the ash, and he told her so, which made her look faintly pleased in a way she kept to herself. She told him a little about how it was made, the way knowledge in her family had been passed down, not in lessons but in proximity. You stood beside your mother and watched her hands, and then you did it yourself, and she corrected the things that needed correcting and said nothing about the rest. The ash came from specific wood, she said. Juniper, when you could get it. The minerals in juniper ash did something to the corn that her mother had explained once, and Saya had half forgotten the explanation, but never forgotten the practice. She said this as though it was simply a fact worth noting, not a window into anything. But he understood it was a window. He told her about the first meal he had learned to cook himself, after his mother had died and before his older sister had come to the house to sort things out. He had been 12. He had found a lard tin and some flour, and made something that bore only passing resemblance to biscuits, but that had gotten him through 4 days without starving. He said this, and she listened, and there was something in the listening and the quality of attention she brought that made him understand she was filing it somewhere, not storing it against him, storing it as a fact about him that mattered. She was teaching him things, and neither of them was naming it that. The fence post they had replaced became something between them they did not discuss. She had mentioned it first, practically because the wood was bad. He had replaced it. The replacing was practical too, but neither of them walked past the corner post without both of them being aware of what had stood there a week before. It was not sentimental exactly. It was more like the acknowledgement of a fact that had changed into something else. He had found her tied to that post, nearly dead, and now she was standing 50 feet from it, telling his sorrel mare that her leg needed more rest and less grass for another few days. That was the fact. Its meaning was still being worked out between them, slowly, in the way of two careful people who have both had reasons to be careful. One evening, 9 days after he had cut her free, she stayed on the porch after supper, when it had become dark enough for the stars to come out hard and bright. He came out to check the weather and found her sitting on the porch steps with her knees drawn up, looking east toward the mountains. He sat on the rail a few feet away. Neither of them moved to go inside. She pointed out a cluster of stars she called the running deer, not the name the astronomy books used, he suspected, but the name the Mescalero had given them, part of a different map of the same sky. She said the running deer rose in the east before the summer rains, and her father used to say that when you could see it clearly, with no haze the rain would come within 10 days. She had been watching it since the day after she arrived. It was very clear. He looked at the cluster she was pointing to. He could not have named it himself. He looked at it for a while, following the rough shape of it, 7 stars in a loose arc that he could imagine, with some generosity, as something moving. 10 days, he said. More or less. Does it work? She turned to look at him. That small, dry patience. It rained last summer, she said. He laughed, which surprised him. It was a genuine one, not performed. The kind of laugh that comes out of a man before he can arrange his face to stop it. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile but was related to one, and then she turned back to the stars. They sat there for an hour. The coyotes started up somewhere in the south pasture, a thin, wavering sound that carried a long way in the clear air. She listened to them without comment. He knew enough to know that coyotes to the Mescalero were complicated. Messengers, tricksters, the carriers of things that had no other way to travel. He did not ask about it. Some things you learned by waiting. The trouble came on a Thursday, 12 days after he had cut her free. He had ridden into Cobre Flat for supplies, flour, salt, lamp oil, and he became aware, in the particular way a man with a lawman's instincts becomes aware of things, that he was being talked about. Not loudly, a few men at the hardware store counter who stopped speaking when he entered, and resumed after he had paid and turned his back. A woman outside the mercantile who looked at him the way people look at something they have decided is a problem. He asked no questions. He loaded his wagon and rode back. That evening a man came to the ranch. He came alone, which was either brave or stupid, and he identified himself as Harlan Dix, county sheriff. He was thick through the chest, with a jaw like a wagon axle, and pale eyes that had the flat quality of a man accustomed to getting his way through proximity. He wore his star the way some men wore their wealth, as a notification. "I'm told," Dick said, standing by his horse and not bothering to dismount, "that you're harboring a Mescalero woman who's wanted for theft." Eli was leaning on the fence rail with his hands in his pockets. "Wanted by who?" he said. "Wade Pruett filed a complaint." "Pruett filed it from where?" "Last I heard his drive was 3 days gone. He sent a rider back with the paperwork." Dick shifted in the saddle. "The woman needs to come in and answer for what she took." "She didn't take anything." Dix's eyes moved, cataloging the house, the barn, the south pasture, looking for her. He did not see her because she was not visible. She was in the barn, where she had been working when Eli had seen the dust of the rider coming and suggested, quietly, that she might want to be inside. She had given him a look that said she understood the suggestion, and was weighing whether to follow it. She had followed it, but the set of her jaw made clear she was not happy about it. "That's for a judge to decide," Dick said. "Then bring a judge," Eli said. "You bring a judge, and I'll stand here beside her while she makes her case, and Pruett's rider can make his. You do it legal and proper. I don't have a problem with it." Dix looked at him for a long time. "People in town are unhappy about this, Cord." People in town have a lot of things to be unhappy about, Eli said. This isn't one of them. Dix rode away without another word. Eli watched the dust until it was gone, then went to the barn. She was standing in the center of the barn floor with her arms folded, and she had heard enough of the conversation to know most of it. "He'll be back," she said. "Yes, with more men. Likely." She looked at him steadily. "You could tell me to go. It would be easier for you." He thought about that for the length of time it took him to pull a piece of straw from his coat pocket and look at it. Then he dropped it. "I could," he said. "I'm not going to." She held his gaze. She was working something out, the same kind of calculation he had seen in her eyes that first morning when she had looked at him over the rope at the fence post, reading the terrain, looking for the fastest way out. But this time the calculation was different. This time she was not looking for an exit. She nodded once and went back to her work. They came 4 days later, not just Dix. Wade Pruett himself, riding hard, his foreman Dell beside him, and 4 men from the Cobrae Flats saloon who had been told some version of the story that made them feel righteous about riding out with the county sheriff on a Saturday morning. 7 men in total. They came up the road in a loose cluster, raising a long tail of dust. Eli saw them from the porch. He had time to step inside, check the rifle, check the revolver, and come back out. He sat on the porch steps, the rifle across his knees. They pulled up at the gate. Dix came forward a few lengths on his horse. Pruett stayed behind him, which told Eli something about who was actually nervous here. "I need you to produce the woman," Dix said. He had a different quality to his voice than he had 4 days ago. He had men behind him now, and that was the kind of math that changed a man's voice. "You can do it easy or you can do it hard, Cord, but she's coming with us." Eli did not move from the steps. "On what charge exactly?" "Theft of property. Silver pocket watch, value $12. "Pruett's watch," Eli said. "That's right." "Pruett has 2 saddlebags," Eli said. He let that sit for a moment. "1 on each side. The watch is in the smaller one, inside the right bedroll." He watched Pruett's face as he said it. Something moved behind Pruett's eyes. Now Pruett knows whether that's true or not. And so do the rest of you, once you check. Pruett's jaw tightened. "You've been talking to a lying Apache. I've been telling you where to look," Eli said. "If I'm wrong, you come back with that judge I mentioned and we'll work it out proper. If I'm right, you ride away and this is finished. Simple enough." A silence stretched. Dell, the foreman, turned his horse slightly and said something low to the man beside him. A couple of the saloon men were looking at Pruett now instead of at Eli, which was a shift. Pruett wheeled his horse. "This isn't finished," he said, and he said it at Eli, but his voice had changed shape. It had the specific flatness of a man who knows he is leaving because he has lost the ground under him and needs time to find a different argument. Dell had already leaned over his own saddlebag. He fumbled for a moment. He brought out a small leather fold. He held it up. He looked at Pruett's back. He looked at Eli. He put it back without a word and followed the others out the gate. Eli stayed on the porch until the dust was a thin line against the mountains. Then he heard her step on the porch boards behind him. He had not heard her come out of the house. She moved that quietly. "You checked his saddlebag," she said. "No," he said. "I guessed, based on what you told me." He paused. "And based on how a man looks when a bluff is true." She stood beside him on the porch for a moment, looking south where the dust was settling. Then she turned and looked at him, and what she saw in his face seemed to answer something she had been carrying since that first morning at the fence post. She reached out and touched the scar below his left ear, not asking, simply touching, the pad of 2 fingers light as a moth landing. He went still. "I wondered about this," she said quietly. "Knife fight in Mesilla," he said. "You said that." She let her hand fall. "But you carry it differently than a man who only got cut in a fight." She looked at him. "Some wounds you don't hide as well as you think." He did not answer right away. The scar felt warm where she had touched it. "No," he said finally. "I don't suppose I do." They stood on the porch in the late afternoon light, the Sacramento foothills going purple to the east, the air carrying the specific stillness she had described to him once as the desert paying attention. He was aware, standing there, that something had shifted between them, not abruptly, not with any drama, but with the slow, unmistakable clarity of a gate swinging open after a long time. She had put her hand to his face and named the wound. He had not looked away. She did not go to Mescalero that week, or the week after. He did not ask her to stay. He would not have put that weight on her after what Pruett and his men had put on her wrists. But she stayed, and they both understood what the staying meant without requiring a conversation about it. In the days that followed the confrontation at the gate, the ranch became a different kind of place. He could not have said exactly what changed, because nothing changed in any single visible way. The cattle still needed tending. The trough on the east side still needed its patch, which she finally showed him how to do properly, pressing wet clay mixed with cattail fibers into the crack, and smoothing it with the heel of her hand. The sorrel mare's leg healed. He replaced 2 more fence posts in the south pasture, the one she had pointed out as soft when she walked the line with him, checking his work. She gathered plants in the mornings before the heat drove the best leaves limp. She knew the names in Mescalero and in Spanish, and would sometimes give them in both, as if teaching him 2 things at once. Osha root for a chest that rattles, wild bergamot, dried and crumbled, for headaches. She brewed a tea from something she called bear root, that he drank skeptically and that, against all reasonable expectation, cleared a stiffness in his left shoulder that had been bothering him since February. He told her one evening the full story of Louis Rail, not the abbreviated version he had offered before, but the real one, the witnesses, the 12 hours the way the sun had looked that afternoon at the gallows, specific and indifferent. She listened to all of it. When he was done, she said, "And you still believe in something like justice, despite that?" He thought about it. "I believe there's a difference between what people do and what they ought to do," he said. "That's all that belief costs, at this point." She was quiet for a moment. "That is not a small thing," she said. He looked at her. "No," he said, "it's not." She had her own losses, she told him in fragments over those weeks, not in a single confession, but in the way careful people share difficult things. A piece here when the moment was right, another piece there. Her mother had died at the agency in 1879 from a fever the agency doctor had not treated in time. Her father had gone north, and she had not received word of him in 4 years. She had learned to do without roots, the way the desert learned to do without water, drawing what it needed from drier sources, going deeper. She said this without self-pity, as a simple description of a thing that was true. He found he wanted to be one of the drier sources she drew from. He did not know how to say this without it sounding like something it was not. So he said it in the way that felt honest, by being there, by showing up at the south fence when she was walking it, by having the posel hot when she came in from a long morning, by listening when she talked and not talking when she was thinking. One morning, she braided a small cord from the fiber of a yucca plant and hung it from the nail above the kitchen door. He asked what it was for. She said it was an old practice among some of the Mescalero women. A cord at the entry meant the house was protected, not by magic, but by intention, that whoever lived there had decided to make it a place where harm was not welcome. He looked at the cord for a moment. "Does it work?" he said. She looked at him with the dry patience she had. "You cut me free from your fence post," she said. "The cord is catching up." Dell came back 2 weeks later, alone and at mid-morning, which was the posture of a man who wanted to be seen as unthreatening. He pulled up at the gate and took his hat off before he spoke, which Eli noted. Dell said that Pruett's watch had been found in the smaller saddlebag when the drive reached Roswell, and Pruett's wife had gone to unpack his things. He said that Pruett was not the kind of man who apologized, but that Pruett had told Dell to say that the matter was settled and there would be no further complaint to the sheriff. He said that Dix had been told the same. He said the 4 men from the saloon had not been told anything, but they were not the kind of men who remembered things for long. Dell turned his hat in his hands. He looked at the new fence post in the corner of the south pasture, the good straight one with the clean dark earth around its base. "She all right?" he said. "Yes," Eli said. Dell nodded. He put his hat back on and rode away. Eli went inside and told Saya. She received it without any visible change of expression. Then she said, "I want to write to the women at the agency, the ones my mother knew. I want them to know what Pruett accused me of, and that it was found to be wrong. I'll take you to the post office in town, he said. Today, if you want. She wrote the letter at the kitchen table, in a hand that was precise and unhurried, and he drove her to town, and they sat in the wagon outside the post office while she sealed the envelope. People on the street looked at them. He looked back. Nobody said anything to him. Nobody had said anything to him directly since the morning at the gate, which, in his experience, meant either that the town had made up its mind in his favor, or that it was still working on the question. Either way, he was not troubled by it. He had been looked at before. She handed the envelope through the post office window herself. She waited for the clerk's confirmation with the same still attention she brought to everything. When they drove back out of town, she sat straight on the wagon seat and did not look at the people who looked at her. And the dignity of that cost her something he understood, and she paid it without flinching. On the drive home she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "There is a word in Mescalero." Díkwíde, she said it carefully, the syllables clean and separate. It means roughly, the moment when a thing you feared turns into a thing you choose. He kept his eyes on the road. The wagon creaked over a dry wash. The afternoon light was long and amber on the flats. "Tell me the moment for you," he said. She did not hesitate. "When you cut the rope," she said. "I was afraid. Then I saw your face. Then I began to choose." He held the reins. The horses walked. The Sacramento foothills held the last of the light. "For me," he said, and he stopped and he started again. "The post," he said. "When you told me the wood was punky, you had no reason to care about my fence. But you did." He paused. That was the beginning of choosing. She looked at him then, and what was in her face was not a grand emotion. It was something quieter than that and more durable, the kind of thing that has already been tested against several hard facts and is still standing. He looked back briefly before the road required his eyes again. They drove the rest of the way in a companionable quiet that was its own kind of speech. In the weeks and months that followed, the ranch on the edge of Cobre Flat became known for a few things. The cattle were well managed. The fences were solid. The kitchen had a cord of braided yucca fiber above the door, and visitors who asked about it received a matter-of-fact explanation from the woman of the house, and a short nod from the rancher, neither of whom seemed to think it required further elaboration. Saya wrote to her mother's friends at Mescalero every month. 2 of them visited in the fall, staying 3 days, and she and Eli spent the evenings on the porch with them, the conversation moving between English and Mescalero and sometimes Spanish, and Eli sat on the porch steps with his coffee and followed as much of it as he could, which was more than he had expected. He was learning. She went to Mescalero herself in the autumn, a trip of 3 days, and he drove her to the edge of the road, east, and watched her ride out on the bay gelding he had saddled for her. She came back 5 days later with dried plants bundled in cloth, a letter from one of her father's cousins, who had word that her father was alive and working for a family in Colorado, and a look on her face that was different from the look she had worn when she left. Not better, not worse, but settled in a way that spoke of something resolved. She also brought back, wrapped in a square of red cloth, a pair of beaded moccasins that her mother's friend Lupe had made and sent as a gift for the rancher who had cut Saya free. Eli held them for a moment, looking at the work, the small, careful beads in a pattern that Saya said was a running deer, which among the Mescalero meant someone who was fleet enough to outrun bad luck. He set them on the kitchen shelf where they remained, and he was careful about it in a way that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with respect. The rebuilt corner post in the south pasture never gave them trouble again. It stood straight and solid through the summer's heat and the winter's frost, and sometimes, walking the fence line together in the early mornings, which had become a habit, a daily thing between them, one or the other of them would put a hand to it without saying anything, the way you touch something that has been tested and held. She had been bound to that post by men who believed her life was worth nothing, and her word was worth less. He had cut the rope, and walked her back from that particular edge, and given her the room to decide for herself whether to stay or go. She had stayed, not from gratitude, not from the absence of better options. She had stayed because she had looked at the terrain and found something she wanted to move toward. That was Saya's word for it. Díkwíde, the moment when a thing you feared turns into a thing you choose. He came to use it himself, privately, for the specific quality of what they had built there on the dry edge of the New Mexico flats, not what had happened to them, what they had chosen, what they kept choosing every morning, walking the fence line in the low slanted light, the Sacramento mountains going gold to the east, the desert paying its particular attention, the good straight post casting a thin straight shadow across the cracked earth, changed everything. That was what people in Cobra Flat said eventually, when they talked about Eli Cord and the woman he had cut free from his fence post that August morning in 1884. Not how it had happened, not the full shape of it, just that it had. That was close enough. That is where this story ends, not with a grand declaration, not with a ceremony anyone outside two people would have recognized as one. It ends with two people walking a fence line in the early morning, one of them pointing out a wire that needs retensioning, the other pulling out a tool to do it, and neither of them needing to say anything about the post at the corner that they both remember and do not need to name. Some things you do not name because they are still happening, because the choosing is not past tense. It is present. It keeps going. Like this story if it meant something to you. Subscribe for more stories from the frontier. Stories of people who found each other in hard circumstances and built something true from it. We'll see you in the next one.